Welcome to the Futurebuild Podcast, where we bring you in-depth conversations with the pioneers and disruptors shaping the future of the built environment. I'm Martin Hurn, Event Director of Futurebuild, and today we're delving into one of the most important challenges in construction, decarbonising the materials we use every day. Joining me is Marion Garfield, Sustainability Director at Heidelberg Materials. Marion has spent over a decade in senior leadership roles within the mineral extractive sector and has a wealth of experience in delivering sustainability strategies at scale. She plays a pivotal role in Heidelberg Materials' ambitious 2030 commitments, driving innovation in carbon capture, hydrogen technology, and circular economy initiatives. Today, we'll discuss the myths surrounding cement's carbon footprint, the company's journey to net zero, and the cutting-edge innovations transforming the industry. But first, let's hear about Marion's own journey in the world of sustainability and construction. Marion, fantastic to have you on the podcast today.
Thank you very much for the invite. Looking forward to it.
And I'm really intrigued actually because you've had quite a fascinating career spanning the sort of, the mineral extraction and the sort of environmental management. So I'm really just keen to sort of understand how you got into that, how you got into your passion for sustainability and in particular in the built environment.
So I think it started when I was quite young, in the sense I was lucky enough to have lots of holidays, travelled quite a lot around Europe with my parents, and I think the interest sort of sparked me then, and I really enjoyed doing geography and those sort of subjects at school. So when I obviously went to university, I did a geography degree, but I had a module in environmental management, and the lecturer at the time, a lady called Harriet, she was just sort of quite inspirational. She was sort of leading quite early on, maybe probably 25 years ago now, about decarbonisation of plastics and ceramics, and that sort of just sparked me. And I always said to myself, when I have to go to work, unfortunately, I want to do something that I enjoy. So you spend a lot of time at work. So yeah, it just sort of became a passion from sort of early on in university, and the opportunities I've had working for, lots of companies with different experiences throughout the construction supply chain has really sort of just driven that passion and enthusiasm for the subject, really.
And you've had the sort of, the real privilege of almost working across so many different sectors as well within your career. How do you think that's sort of shaped your approach to sustainability?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think every sort of person or every company in the supply chain, when we think about a construction of a building or an infrastructure project, they all have a slightly different role and a slightly different influence in terms of how they can drive sustainability and improvements in sustainability. So I think having been sat in those different positions and in different chairs and in different meetings and decision sort of processes, it's helped me sort of to really understand the true sort of supply chain collaboration. And I think that's learning sort of got me to helping or being quite useful in a Heidelberg Materials position now, where, for me, it's all that integration and collaboration, which is going to be key to delivering this decarbonisation sort of plan and strategy that we've got as an organisation.
And you joined Heidelberg in 2016. And what I would say is, and this is sort of from my external view, is that the cement and concrete industry has probably seen one of the biggest shifts, in that time. I'd love to sort of get your perspective on that, from being within it, sort of how that's changed over the last decade.
Yeah, I suppose my view would be, traditionally sustainability was sometimes seen as sort of a side function, and it was predominantly around compliance around environmental law. And there's sort of the two other pillars that drive sustainability, the economic and the social, were sometimes forgotten or not given enough importance in organisations. And I think over the last sort of 10 years, we've actually seen that levelling up of the three pillars. And I think from a Heidelberg Material point of view, the last sort of 3 or 4 years, we've had a fantastic change because of the leadership across the global business, but also in the UK. When you've got sort of Dr. Van Acton, who's our CEO in Heidelberg Materials Global, sort of comfortably talking about sustainability, saying to, the capital markets, we want to be part of the solution, not the problem. He's really driving that sort of ambition and innovation. And if you have that from a senior leader in an organisation, it makes my job sort of as a sustainability director in the UK quite easy, because you're sort of pushing against an open door, which was once sort of quite sometimes a bit stuck or a bit sort of needed a good push to get that engagement. So I think it's just that leadership and just a realisation, we've seen some real horrific sort of climate emergency issues in the last few weeks with the forest fires in the States. And I think they're becoming now sort of mainstream and too frequent. So the reality is starting to kick in as well. And I think people are starting to see that actually we need to do something different.
So let's just take a quick step back. For those people maybe who are listening who aren't aware of Heidelberg Materials, because it used to be a different brand in the UK, of course, until recently. Can you just give us a little bit of an overview of what it is sort of globally, but also, from a UK perspective?
Yeah, sure. So Heidelberg Materials globally is a construction materials supplier business. It manufactures cement, aggregates, asphalt, concrete around the globe. In the UK, we used to be called Hanson, and we rebranded about 2 years ago, and we all became under the umbrella of Heidelberg Materials. And the view of that was we wanted to be seen as a global brand that gives, the opportunity for other global companies to have consistency with, the materials we supply, but also the customer interface and things like that. But from a UK perspective, Heidelberg Materials is around delivering that sustainability, and it just made sense at the time. And it's making a real good. It's giving us lots of good opportunities in terms of people now connecting the dots up around some of our European and global projects, especially around the decarbonisation and the carbon capture. Yeah. So we rebranded about 2 years ago, and it's always a bit of a risk. Will people remember us? Will people think we've changed governance or business model? But we haven't. We just changed the names, and it was carried on as business as usual.
I suppose you've got the benefit then of global learnings as well, and global initiatives.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think my CEO was at a conference about 12 months ago, and he was a light bulb moment came on for him. About two people in front of him who was presenting was talking about the Northern Lights project. Heidelberg Materials in the Northern Lights project, and then he got up on stage and said, "This is fantastic. I'm Heidelberg Materials in the UK." This is like, it's like we put it together. But 2 or 3 years prior to that, it would have been they stood up as Heidelberg Materials, and we would have stood up at Hanson. And I think people, I don't think, would have connected us together as a global organisation. So I think that's where we get that real sort of global value of a global business, but obviously being able to bring that specialised and sort of learning from all the projects into a UK business as well.
So before we get on to all the amazing work that you're doing with Heidelberg Material, I wanted to sort of scene set us a little bit as well, and sort of maybe talk about some of the myths and realities of the cement and the concrete industry. And a lot of people are quite negative towards concrete or give it quite a bad reputation and talk about its huge contributions to carbon emissions. But can you break down really maybe some of the reality or why that perception exists?
Yeah, I think, look, we've got to put it into some sort of context here. When we think about cement and concrete, we manufacture around the globe something like 4 billion tonnes of cement annually around the globe. So it's a massive sort of manufactured process. And concrete is the second most used material in the globe behind water. So it's used for lots and lots of things in terms of infrastructure, hospitals, schools, buildings, homes. So its properties provide, its strengths, its durability, its fire retardant. And there are other materials that you can use in a similar sort of building process. But, concrete there's a lot of it used, there's a lot of it manufactured around the world, and there's not really a reasonable substitution at the moment. So I think that the challenge is trying to get people to understand the difference between cement and concrete. There's obviously sometimes a bit of a misunderstanding between what cement is and what concrete is, and how cement and concrete are sort of embedded in together in terms of the process and the carbon story and the decarbonisation strategy. So yeah, I think there's a lot of myths out there. And I think this is one of the important things that we're trying to do is in the UK particularly is, early engagement, collaboration with our customers, the specifiers and our architects and our contractors really to try to remove some of those myths. So there's a clear understanding of where the carbon is and what the options are for lower carbon choices in the construction industry. And that's all around collaboration and education really. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about that though. Let's delve into sort of, for those people that aren't aware of the difference between a cement and a concrete, and maybe where the sort of the carbon emissions comes from in that manufacturing process.
Yeah, so let's take the cement manufacturing process. So in simple terms, it's basically we quarry the limestone from a quarry usually adjacent to a cement works, and we take the limestone, we crush it, we blend it with some other materials just to get the chemical balance right, and then we burn it at about 1,400 degrees. And the process, by heating the limestone up, releases CO2. It's a natural chemical process. So you get what we call clinker at the end of that process. And that's what you grind down to make cement. So it's a natural chemical process. So when you take a cement works, 70% of the CO2 emissions that come from the cement works come from that chemical process. So one of the challenges with decarbonising construction is obviously cement is used then within the concrete for the concrete. So decarbonising concrete, you have to decarbonise cement. So we've got to look at ways that we can reduce those process emissions. The other 30% of the emissions come from the fuel that we use to actually, heat the limestone, but also using the processing of the cement. So the mills that we use to mill the cement, crushers that we use to crush the limestone. So it's a high energy intense process, and we're making some good progress on the fuels.
Yeah, I would say the sort of the advancements in sort of the technology and the solutions around sort of decarbonising cement and concrete is quite phenomenal. It's going at a rapid pace as well. Do you want to talk about some of the ones maybe that you're implementing?
Yeah, sure. So in terms of the Heidelberg group, so we've committed to be net zero by 2050 as part of our 2030 commitments as a global company. And the only way that you can get to a true net zero position in cement is to capture that CO2 from that process that we just mentioned earlier on. So we're investing quite heavily in carbon capture technology on the cement works. So we've got our first plant that's been commissioned in Brevik in Norway, and that would be the first cement works in the world that's got a carbon capture plant attached to a cement works. And then in the UK, we're investing in a carbon capture plant at Padeswood, our cement works over in Cheshire in Mould. So carbon capture is one of the technologies that we have to have as an enabler to get to a net zero position in cement. The other things that we've got obviously are we're looking at efficiencies in our processes, but also our fuel. So sort of traditionally, cement would use fossil fuels like coal to generate the heat that's required for the chemical process. But nowadays we've got an alternative fuel mix within our cement works where we use SRF, which is sort of recycled plastic waste. We use MBM, which is meat and bone meal from the abattoir industry, and then we also use a SEM fuel mix, which is sort of solvents and fuel. So the last sort of 5 or 6 years, we've been really trying to modify and improve the opportunities to use those alternative fuels. So our Ketton works in Rutland last year did a trial, and it went zero fossil fuel for a number of trial days, which is fantastic. And we're at about 85-90% alternative fuel rates within the 3 works across the UK, dependent on one of the challenges is the supply and reliability of the fuel. So we are looking at also getting down to that zero fuel emissions as well.
And what amazed me is that these, especially your carbon capture solutions, these aren't sort of things that are going to be happening in 10, 20 years. These are going to come on stream, I think one of them was by 2028.
Yeah. So it's happening now, yeah. And I think that's one of the, we mentioned about it earlier. Heidelberg are actually actioning their promises. We've got an ambition to capture 4 million tonnes of CO2 by 2030. So we've got Brevik coming online this year. Page was coming online in 2028. We've got a similar facility in Edmonton in Canada. We've got 13 projects in various stages of pre-feasibility, feasibility, FID studies across the globe. So again, like Dr. Van Acton says, he wants to be part of the solution, not the problem, and we're really driving that decarbonisation. Yeah. So, and coming back to that whole sort of corporate global branding positioning, all the stuff at Brevik that we've learned over the last 2 or 3 years, we sort of will take that learning and implement it over at the Padeswood plant. So yeah, for us it's a fantastic, really, really exciting sort of 5 years in terms of Brevik will be the first one online this year. Padeswood will probably be the second or third, depending on how quickly if we can beat the Canadians to it. But yeah, really, really good opportunities. Fantastic.
And for you in your role, head of sustainability, it must be amazing because you're seeing, huge results and strides, almost instantly.
Yeah, like I said, it's fantastic for a company, and I think that's also one of the changes is that like Heidelberg Materials see it. For us to be a company that will be in existence in the next 10, 15 years, we've got to innovate and we've got to deliver on our decarbonisation promises. And I think, it's starting to become embedded into business processes. I've got a fantastic exec in the UK that really understand the decarbonisation challenge. They're embedding it into their sort of business processes, their management cycles. The ownership has sort of shifted from where it would traditionally be like a sustainability group function in companies to actually embedded into the businesses, which makes everything a lot easier to actually embed and actually deliver and the action. So it's fantastic.
For me, it feels like, it's not just nowadays about compliance. It's not just doing it to the minimum level. It's about really establishing yourself as a leader and going further. And I'd love to talk a little bit about, you've got ambitious 2030 targets, but also you do your whole sustainability initiatives around 4 key pillars as well, and it's probably worth touching on each of those.
Yeah, and I think that's really important, is that, we're going beyond compliance. We want to be the leader in the decarbonisation, especially in the UK, and we want our customers and our clients to come to us because they want to help to decarbonise their projects and to help them to decarbonise their companies as well. But we've got our 2030 commitments, which we released 3 years ago now, and they're under sort of four key pillars. We've got a net zero pillar, which is obviously about decarbonising cement and concrete, which are our biggest levers, but also about decarbonising our asphalt business as well and our aggregate business as well. We've also got a safe and inclusive pillar. Now, for me, all of this is all around if we haven't got the right people, and we've got to bring the next generation along with us in terms of our skill sets, our upskilling. It's a completely different skill set around some of this decarbonisation stuff. So it's about being an inclusive organisation. We've just done an employee survey. We increased our employee engagement score quite a lot from when we did 18 months ago. So we're working all towards the sort of the right steps. And obviously safety, we have a safety first clear message. Again, the safety is clear ownership by the senior managers and team in this business. So it's all around being safe and inclusive, and the wellbeing is part of that pillar as well. And social value, for me, that's something that I've seen has been a massive shift in the sustainability arena in the last 3 or 4 years. Is actually looking at our social impact and how we can support areas that we're operating in and in our local communities, but also help our customers and our clients. And then the other 2 pillars are around sustainable revenue. So we want to be generating 50% of our revenue by sustainable products. And sustainable products are sort of defined as a reduction of 30% of CO2 from a baseline, and then also using potentially 30% less material and also using 30% recycled material. And then nature positive. We operate lots and lots of quarries. I think we've got about 85 quarries around the UK, and around the globe we've got a huge number. And we want to make sure that we're being responsible operators. We want to make sure we restore the land to a higher biodiversity value than before we got the land. And water management as well, making sure that we understand water risks. We're quite fortunate in the UK that water is relatively well regulated and managed. In other parts of the globe, water is a significant business continuity risk where they have to bring water into sites to enable them to operate. So there's lots and lots of complexity. So the 4 pillars for us is around trying to have a structure that aligns with what our customers want, but also where our business risks are as well.
And I suppose, this clear focus as well, you mentioned about, attracting talent as well, and especially sort of the younger generation. We're all so environmentally conscious now as well. We can see clearly, you mentioned it yourself a minute ago, we've got this sort of climate emergency, but also a biodiversity emergency as well. This must only help with recruitment.
Yeah, and it's really interesting. We're seeing, we run a great grad and lead programme in the UK, and we're seeing actually part of the selection process, they're actually selecting us sometimes on what we're doing, and they come to us. Some of them have come to us and said, I wasn't going to look at the construction industry, but then I saw you doing this carbon capture project, or you're doing these hydrogen trials, and that looks amazing. So I think it's really, I think it would be naive of organisations to not really undervalue how important I think that's going to be for future generations, and also for retention of talent. You look at what opportunities there are elsewhere, and we've got to make sure that we retain the talent in this industry. It's a fantastic industry to work in. I've worked in it for most of my career. I think it's brilliant, and it's trying to make sure it's attractive to the young next generation coming through.
Yeah. So 2030, I think when most organisations sort of set that deadline, including the government, it felt like an age away.
Yeah, it's fast approaching.
It's 5 years.
Not far.
You've got some big targets, some big aspirations at that point. What do you see currently sort of maybe some of the biggest barriers, to overcome?
Yeah, I think one of the things we're finding now is obviously we set the 2030 targets, and we're looking at better data and getting better data, better granulated data, and actually being able to do a lot more sort of analysis on the data. And I think one of the challenges is actually now we've got this data, does it actually reflect what we thought 3 or 4 years ago? Scope 3 is a great example. We're looking at our Scope 3 emissions and we want to reduce our Scope 3 emissions. And when we set the targets, we sort of were using sort of estimates and predicted data, whereas now we're actually getting live data. And sometimes that can be a slight difference. So I think it's being honest and open if you're not going to achieve it, understanding why, and rebalancing the objectives and targets. But I'm quite confident for the UK for the 2030 commitments. We'll have pavers online in terms of our carbon capture plant. We'll have the Evo Zero product coming from Brevik available in the UK sort of Q3 this year. For sort of zero carbon cement if customers want it. We'll have obviously the paved cement, and there's lots of stuff that we're doing with low carbon concrete even now. It's available now. So sustainable revenues, I think we're in a good place. Our asphalt business, we're already reusing a lot of RAP in our products. That's already gone up significantly after our last few years. So I think it's all working towards the right direction, but I think it's just making sure you sort of sense check that there's still the right priorities for the business, because things can move and new innovations come on board, and customers and clients have sometimes changed their sort of direction of travel as well. So who knows, things might change dramatically in the next 2 or 3 years, but hopefully not too much.
It's interesting you mentioned the phrase sort of if our customers want it, because I think it's an interesting place we've got at the moment, because I think at a specification level, especially with architects, that they really get it. They really get, they have a very deep understanding of carbon. They're very carbon literate, and I spoke to a lot of sort of architects on this podcast where they say sometimes at board level it's a bit lost. It's about sort of it comes down to cost, availability, and I imagine that's the same in the concrete and cement world as well. It's sort of, where's the demand for this product coming from? Is it just at a specification level, or are you seeing it?
Yeah, and I think that goes back to the point about what we have to do differently moving forward. I think it's about that whole education piece, and educating everyone in every organisation from the board down and back up again. And I think the demand in some respects is coming from the government. The government is the biggest procurer of concrete in the UK. We know that in terms of their projects. We know that the Lower Thames Crossing has set up some really strict, tight carbon ambitions for that project, and they want to be the lighthouse project in terms of low carbon. So I think it's coming from the sort of the end client, but also it's coming from the end client in terms of like the building standards, making buildings that are the whole life cycle of building now in terms of carbon, and obviously the material that goes into the building can help that sort of calculation. So I think it's coming from a number of places. I think architects, they're on it, they're on board, they know exactly what. I think where the opportunity is trying to get an understanding when we get to the engineers and the specifiers at the project level. I still think that's probably one area where we do need to do a little bit more work on that, because of how they're engineering it, and are they potentially over engineer it because of standards and taking risks on potentially different types of construction methods.
One of the next steps is, am I right in saying, is that they're defining what you now mean by low carbon concrete as well?
Yes,
How's that working?
Well, so there's a number of different measures in terms of 2 or 3 different ones out there in the marketplace. But for us, we've got the Evo Zero, Evo Build brand. So Evo Zero is our low carbon, zero carbon cement, and Evo Build is our low carbon products. So we've always had a range of low carbon concrete in our business. But we're obviously trying to be clear and consistent with our customers about what that actually means. So does it have the volume of GGBS replacement and what the applications are? So I think it's important to be clear on that. And EPDs, more and more people are asking for EPDs. We've done a lot of work in the last 2 years. I've got a fantastic team that look after EPDs in the UK, and they're doing a lot of work now trying to set up. We've already set up a data link so we can give carbon data to a project via a link, and then we're also trying to set up an automation of the EPDs at a project level. So I think that transfer of data will also help with that decision process, because I think sometimes because the data's been taken so long in the past, the project's sort of done and dusted before you think, oh, you know what, we could have transferred that stem 1 mix to a GGBS replacement mix, but you've already lost the opportunity to do that. So I think the more we can get real-time data, the more it allows the engineers and the construction part of the project to actually make those decisions. And that's also sort of one of the things we're looking at as a UK business.
So your low carbon cement, if I'm right in saying, has it's a 30, 40, 50, isn't it? There's three ranges of it. How does that differ with then performance to standard cement or concrete?
So it performs the same. It's just the replacement from a traditional CEM one with a GGBS. So GGBS is obviously the low carbon cementitious sort of replacement. So SCMs usually they can be referred to. Okay. So it's just a cementitious replacement that lowers the embedded carbon of the concrete. So the 30 just represents the percentage of that changeover. Yeah.
So at a contractor level, why wouldn't I just always go for the 50?
Again, it depends on the application. Sometimes if you need a strength or you need a durability or you need an application, it can't be used in certain applications. Right. And that's where I think the educational piece comes into play with some of these decisions. But there are elements where they say, I've always had that, I'll just keep on with that. And this is where we've got to get better at spending time in the boots on ground and trying to explain the differences and the opportunities. And, we've got a fantastic technical department. We've got a lady called Nida Cardinal, who's our technical director for cement. And what she doesn't know about cement and low carbon cement, I don't think is worth knowing. And we've also got a great technical director in our concrete business called Danny Claydon. And again, he's a wizard at concrete. And I think it's trying to get to customers that says, look, if you want some help or you don't know, just come and ask us, pick the phone up. We really want to help. We really want to have those conversations. And I think the earlier we do in a project, the better. Yeah. Because we can give them the options. You can have this option, you can have this option, you can have this option. These are the carbon sort of intensities. And it's trying to sort of have those conversations early doors.
I think one thing that was clear, when I was doing my research for this podcast was the amount of innovation that's going on within the concrete industry. And I interview on this podcast a lot of startups as well who come out with sort of ideas or amazing products that can do that. It's sort of, how do you go out and find innovation? And I suppose, how do you assess that you're going down the right path as well? Because we've talked about, when with cement and concrete, there's the sort of, the fuel side, there's the sort of, the admixture, the aggregates. There's a lot of areas that you can make improvements.
Yeah. In terms of the innovation projects, we're always searching for opportunities for projects that can be funded or part funded. We did the hydrogen project at Ribble 2 or 3 years ago, which was part funded by the MPA around the fuel switching with hydrogen. We've also got an innovation project going on at the moment in our asphalt plant in Criggion. So we're looking to replace the traditional natural gas fuel into the burner of the asphalt plant with hydrogen. So again, that's an innovation project. That would potentially be the world's first hydrogen-enabled burner to manufacture asphalt in the world. So we've got decarbonisation plans for each of our business lines and work streams. And we're always looking at opportunities. And we've just done a project with a company called Sea Capture, which was using a slightly different carbon capture technology. We were part of the partnership to connect it into our Ketton Cement Works. So we're always looking for opportunities with partners and startups. And again, going back to that point around being a global company, we get opportunities from, we've got a global research lab in Italy where they will do trials with all sorts of opportunities for low carbon cement. So we get those learnings as well, and we can pass them on, and we can bring experts in, and we can share that learning around the globe, but also around within the UK. So I think innovation is going to be one of the key things to deliver decarbonisation plans. So and for me, we've seen a lot of change in the industry, and there's lots of opportunities, even looking at things like how do we electrify our fleet, not our light vehicle fleet, but our heavy machine equipment, our yellow kit, our JC, the Volvos and the JCVs of the world. How on earth do we do that? We've got hundreds of them running around our quarries, all currently on diesel. How are we going to decarbonise them in the future? So those sort of innovations is fantastic, and we're doing a lot of work with the OEMs at the moment to try and work out what the strategy is for us as a business as well.
I'd love to touch back on you were talking about the carbon capture technology there. Everyone's heard about it, but not many people maybe understand exactly what it is or how it works. And I'd love to sort of, ask you a little bit about that.
Oh, it's top secret. No, it's not. No, it's not. The first question we always get asked is, isn't it a bit risky doing a carbon capture plant? And we're like, well, no, not really. Carbon capture technology has been around for the last 30 years. The oil and gas industry have been using carbon capture technology. What's different in our project is it's never been attached to a cement works. So actually the combination of the cement works and the gas that's produced from the cement works in terms of CO2, making sure that the chemical composition is sort of going to work. So the general principle is we take the gas off the flue, which is where it currently goes out into the atmosphere, and we use a solution called amine, and the amine solution splits the CO2 out of the gas and it captures it and it recirculates it back into a pipe. So in Brevik, it's going to be taken off onto ships and then stored into what's called the Northern Light project in the North Sea. In Padeswood, it's going to be taken via pipeline through to the point of air and then stored in Liverpool Bay. So it's a slightly different process, but basically the amine solution is stripping the CO2 out of the gas and it recirculates the amine solution back into the process, and the CO2 gets captured and then stored. So it's, like I said, it's new technology in the sense of being put to a cement works, and it's obviously very technically and very sort of complex, lots of high pressures and things like that. But in terms of the actual technology, it's not new technology. It's been used for years and years and years.
And at Brevik, you mentioned it's given you then that world first, doesn't it? It's given you the first sort of carbon captured net zero cement.
Yeah, and what a fantastic opportunity for us. We are really keen to get this Evo Zero cement into some lighthouse projects in Q3 this year. We've got already signed up a project, Noble Centre, which is fantastic, through Skanska, which will be the world's first. But in the UK, we're looking for opportunities, and I know we've got a few NDAs signed with some opportunities that will hopefully come out in the next few weeks.
Yeah, and that is a real game changer, isn't it, when that comes on?
Yeah, massively so, because obviously it will really sort of drive that. The organisations that really want to put their net zero ambitions into fruition, they can actually do it. There's nothing stopping them now from buying the Evo Zero cement.
So when the Evo Zero cement comes on, could that one day replace all cement?
Yeah, so one of the questions we get is, will it be technically different? Will I have to do... No, because obviously we're not changing the manufacturing process of the cement. It will be exactly the same technically as your current CEM 1. It will just be the CO2 is captured from the process. Yeah. So technically, no, it will just be a standard sort of cement.
So I imagine in the early days you've got a slight price premium, but then the hope is all facilities go on board on that, then it comes down and
absolutely, yeah.
Amazing. One thing we haven't touched on, but I'm really passionate about, is about the circularity and reuse side, and I know that's one of the really big pillars that you're doing as well. And I know recently you actually bought or acquired a whole waste recycling company as well.
Yeah, so one of our key pillars obviously is this sustainable revenue, and one of the key drivers for us is this circularity piece, and how do we get circularity embedded into our business process. So we've got an ambition for 9 million tonnes of recycled aggregates to be used back into our processes by 2030 in our aggregate business. And what we're trying to do is embed this into current sites. So we've got a lot of depots already sort of established, and we're going to build on that footprint. But obviously we're also acquiring sort of traditional recycling businesses like McGeorge Limited, like BNA in Bristol and A1 in Manchester. And we're trying to develop the business model so our customers get a business model which is truly circular. So they come in, they tip their waste arisings, and they collect a sort of a processed secondary aggregate. And in A1 in Manchester, we've already sort of demonstrated that we can produce a replacement sand, a secondary replacement sand. And we're investing in wash plants throughout the UK to enable us to sort of process this material as well. But you have to remember that circularity has already been in part of our business model in terms of the asphalt business. RAP is fully, asphalt planings, asphalt roads, they're 100% recyclable, and we've always had that as part of our business model. So it's not a new concept to us, but we're just sort of turboing it and increasing its sort of opportunity to us as a business. And we're also looking at things like how can we recycle, use concrete. How can we demolish concrete and reprocess that to enable us to have a potential secondary cementitious material that could potentially, again, lower the carbon content of the concrete.
I agree with you. I think the big game changer at the moment in that has become there's a process efficiency now that we haven't maybe had that long, but also people are seeing the value in waste as well, and raw material.
Yeah, and it comes back down to this piece about educating everyone in the supply chain that they actually see the true value in some of the traditional, what they would class as waste, and what they would traditionally have used that for. The actual value of that waste material actually could be used at a higher value within the chain. So it's trying to understand and get those markets and get out to those markets. But one of the opportunities that we saw within the McGeorge business was obviously they collect a lot of residual waste in terms of plastics and papers and wood. And obviously alternative fuel, SRF, is predominantly a lot of that waste. So again, that true circularity, they would traditionally have sent that off for potentially going off into other areas for disposal. We can actually embed that into our cement process. So a brilliant, true circularity piece.
Yeah. And do you see the sort of government putting more policies into this to drive a little bit more of circularity in the built environment?
I hope so, yeah. I hope they there's always this challenge around what we can use in terms of recycled products into the concrete standards and things, the traditional, you can only put 20% recycled aggregates in. So I think they're the sort of things that really need to be done to try and enable and embed this sort of movement to circularity. I think people get the concept, but sometimes they find it difficult to actually put it into reality or put it into projects.
Yeah. So we've mentioned the 2030 deadline quite a lot, 5 years. Yeah. If we check back in with you, get you back on, well, hopefully we're still doing the podcast in 5 years.
Yeah.
What do you hope to see, in your sustainability journey and Heidelberg Materials sustainability journey?
Well, obviously, would love to be doing this podcast at Pagewood, live from the carbon capture facility. Wow. That would be fantastic. I think it's really about having that awareness and having that industry knowledge. Just everyone is a sustainability sort of expert, all can speak confidently and comfortably about net zero carbon products, how we're making decisions based on projects. But for me also it's around, we've got a space for nature target by 2030. We want 15% space for nature on all of our quarries, making sure we've achieved that and some more. We want to be a responsible neighbour. I think we're also looking at social value piece around, how do we make sure we're making the right choices in terms of where we spend time, resources on social value. So for me, it's just making sure that we're continuously improving. And always sense checking back to say, actually, is it the right thing for us as a business? Is it adding value for us as a business? Is it helping us to attract the right people, the right customers and the right clients? So I think there's just continuous progression in all of the things we're trying to do in terms of sustainability.
Yeah. We haven't touched on it, but actually collaboration is a key point here. And you've mentioned some amazing partners. Obviously you're partnering with Skanska on that first project there as well. How important is collaboration?
Oh, massively, massively. I don't think, you hear a lot about organisations claiming they're going to be net zero by 2030, 2040, and obviously we're saying 2050. And it's really clear that no one's going to achieve their decarbonisation strategies and their sustainability strategies without working together throughout the supply chain. And I think that's the key thing we've got to get better at, is working collaboratively, sharing successes, but also sharing when things don't go right and when they go wrong, to learn from what happened and why it happened. So I think collaboration is huge, and I think it's very difficult to do because you want to be sort of independent and be sort of the leader in it. But I think it's only going to work if everyone collaborates.
I think we are an industry that's maybe been sometimes guilty of working in silos.
Yeah.
But I think there's been a huge shift, away from that. Things like the Net Zero Building Standard has brought together major institutions, to really drive things forward.
Yeah, and I think it's collaboration between those institutions as well within the construction industry, which is also going to be quite critical to make sure that everyone's aligned and talking the same language and talking the same sort of concepts, because I think it's very easy to get confused. And I think that's one of the key. Just try and keep it simple, try and keep the language consistent, and try and be clear on what we are all trying to achieve.
Yeah. You talked a lot about that sort of next generation. What would be a piece of advice that you'd give maybe a sort of a young girl at high school at the moment, and maybe wants to follow a similar career path to yourself? What's some advice you might give them?
I think have an open mind. I think take opportunities that you might not think are right, but you just don't know. You can always sort of say, I tried it didn't work. And for me, always try and be slightly out of your comfort zone with stuff you're doing. Always continue to be learning and not think you know everything, because there's always someone that can teach you something or you can learn from something. So I think it's just having that curiosity about what can be done, how can things be done differently. Just because things have always been done that way doesn't say it mean it's the right way to do things in the future. But yeah, I get out, get experience. I always find in this industry particularly, and it's probably why I've really enjoyed being in it, is that there's so many people willing to help you, mentor you, share with you, teach you. If you don't know something, you just ask. And people are very willing to share their knowledge and experience. And I think that's really critical, is that sort of the older generation or the experienced generation also making sure that they spend the time sort of educating and passing down that knowledge, because it soon gets lost. So yeah, I'll ask questions. I always ask stupid questions.
And actually, that leads really nicely on to probably one of my last questions, which is we like to finish the podcast with talking about impact and sort of who's had a real positive impact on you during your career. It's sort of, nice to highlight some individuals out there.
Yeah, I think for early days I had a really good mentor who was the head of safety when I worked for Agri Industries at the time, a guy called Graham Wells. And he was very good at how important leadership is and leadership qualities. And I was a very young, inexperienced person at that time, early in my career. But he really sort of demonstrated to me, actually, if you've got to really get buy-in from the leaders and how you engage with leaders and communicate with leaders. But then more recently, I've had like I said, I've got a great exec that I work with at the moment. Our CEO, Simon Willis, he's very good. He's very positive. He's very sort of honest and down to earth as a CEO for a UK-based company. And I think that always helps, that you can go and have a chat with him and you don't feel like you're going to the headmaster and telling him a tale. So I think having that sort of authentic leadership has helped me as well. But, I think it's good to have people outside of industry that you can go and have a moan to as well. So having those sort of touch points outside of industry are really important as well.
Absolutely. And then, I always like to ask people maybe, recommend a book that's had a great impact on you.
Yeah, I've recently read a book, and it's from the founders of the brand Patagonia.
Oh, yes.
And I've found that whole sort of business model fascinating, and it's the book about all of their sort of business and sustainability ethos is about how they, their advertisement is, don't buy a new coat, we don't want you to buy this coat. And you think, that's crazy, that must be sort of marketing corporate suicide. But it's fantastic when you read the book about the impact they want on the local communities and how they have a real true sort of circularity mindset about, you can send any piece of equipment or item of clothing you've bought from them, doesn't matter how old, doesn't matter where you bought it from, the fact that you haven't got a receipt, they'll repair it for you free of charge. Yeah. And all of the postage and also all of the labour is all free of charge, because their view is they want to have a minimum impact on the environment as possible. So that book for me was fascinating in terms of their mindset around actually truly embedding core sustainability values into that business model. And it seemed, it's working for them. They're huge. You see them, people all over the globe wearing it. So that book for me was fascinating.
Absolutely right. People buy into that brand. That's it. And it becomes their ethos as well. So no, I absolutely agree. I think that's a fantastic book. I can't thank you enough for coming on the podcast. And I think, it's going to be really exciting to see, the impact that you're going to have, on the concrete industry in the next 5 years. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. And like I said, look, we want to really help our customers and our clients. And I think the most important thing is, give us a call, get in touch. All of our contact details are on our website. All of our case studies are on our website. We've done some fantastic sort of seminars, Let's Talk Sustainability events around decarbonisation and the 2030 commitment. So we want to talk to our customers, we want to help our customers, and fundamentally we want to be leading in the industry.
Thank you.
Perfect, thanks.